black tech CEO named Nia Bell sends one private text to the wrong employee just minutes before a crash changes her life. I'm pregnant. The man who receives it, night janitor Elijah Reed, is a widowed single father raising his gentle young daughter Zuri after losing his wife in hospice. When Nia wakes trapped inside her own body, unable to speak or move, she becomes a silent witness to her board's betrayal, her family's greed, and a plan to erase both her unborn child and her power. The only people who treat her like she is still there are Elijah, Zuri, and a nurse who starts noticing things that do not add up. A quiet phrase keeps returning whenever hope feels thin. You are not alone. What begins as a mistaken text becomes the thread that leads Nia back to herself, to justice, and to a softer life no title could buy. The text lit up Elijah Reed's phone like a secret that had missed its door. I'm pregnant. He stood alone on the 42nd floor of Bell Horizon Tower, one hand resting on the long wooden handle of his mop, the other still wrapped around the buzzing phone he almost never checked before the end of his shift. Outside the glass wall, the city shimmered in wet silver and gold, every street below looking softer from this height, as if even noise had to ask permission before rising this far. Inside, the office was spotless, silent, and cold in that expensive way meant to feel powerful. For a second, Elijah thought he had read it wrong. Then, he looked again. I'm pregnant. No name, no explanation. Just 2 words and a trembling kind of finality that made them feel heavier than they should have. Elijah frowned and wiped his hand on the side of his dark work pants before opening the thread. The number was familiar. He had seen it before on internal building contacts, passed through security notices and maintenance approvals. Not often, never personally, but enough to know who it belonged to. Nia Bell, the Nia Bell, founder and chief executive of Bell Horizon, the woman whose face appeared in business magazines in airport shops and on giant digital screens in the lobby downstairs. She was known for seeing 3 steps ahead, for never arriving late, for never repeating herself, and for carrying herself with a kind of calm that made other people straighten their shoulders when she walked by. People in the building spoke her name in 2 tones only, admiration or fear. No one ever spoke of her as vulnerable. Elijah slowly set the mop against the wall and stared at the message again. The executive floor around him looked as polished as a museum after closing. Glass offices reflected strips of recessed light. Awards on floating shelves caught the shine like little pieces of moon. A model of the company's newest campus stood under a clear case near the conference room, neat and untouched, like a world no one was allowed to disturb. He should have ignored the text. That would have been the safe thing. Smart thing, too. A man in his position knew better than to step inside a mistake made by somebody with power. One wrong move, and people could twist kindness into ambition, concern into intrusion. He had a daughter to feed, rent due in 8 days, and exactly no time for misunderstandings involving the richest woman in the building. Still, he did not put the phone away. Because the message did not read like carelessness. It read like someone standing at the edge of something life-changing, alone in the dark, reaching for a familiar hand and finding the wrong number instead. Elijah knew the sound of fear when it was trying to stay neat. He looked around the empty floor again. During the day, this place moved with clipped heels, polished voices, and the quiet performance of people who never wanted to look uncertain. At this hour, stripped of all that motion, the tower felt different, not powerful. Lonely, like all this glass and steel had been built to impress the world, but not to hold a human heart when it broke open. His thumb hovered over the keyboard. Delete the message, say nothing, leave it alone. Instead, Elijah drew in a slow breath and typed the simplest truth he knew. I think you meant to text someone else. He paused, then added one more line before he could talk himself out of it. But whoever you meant to reach, you should know you do not have to carry news like that alone. Elijah kept staring at the screen long after he sent the message, as if the words might come back and ask him why he had crossed a line he usually respected. But the truth was, he had not written to a CEO in that moment. He had written to a frightened person. That difference mattered to him. His hands were damp from the mop handle, the skin across his knuckles rough and pale from soap, winter air, and too many shifts that asked more of his body than they paid for. by the time most people in the tower were. Nia Bell stayed in the driver's seat after the tears had passed, one hand on the wheel, the other holding the phone that had betrayed how shaken she was. The garage around her was hushed, except for the low hum of ventilation. She was used to silence that obeyed her. This silence felt different. Her screen lit up again. This time, the message came from board member Roland Pike. Need to discuss succession risks first thing in the morning. Investors cannot be blindsided. Nia stared at the words until they seemed to harden on the glass. Not how are you? Not are you safe? Not even can this wait? Succession risks. As if her body had already become a vacancy. She set the phone down and closed her eyes. The pregnancy had changed everything in hours. Personally, it had cracked open a part of her life she had kept guarded for years. Publicly, it threatened headlines and speculation. Legally, it complicated inheritance, control, and decisions she had not yet put in order. Financially, she knew private news could become a market concern. She reached for her phone again and tapped Marcus's name, her brother. The call started to ring. Then she ended it before he could answer. Nia stared through the windshield at the wall ahead. Marcus loved the idea of family more than the work of it. He was charming in public, wounded in private, and too interested in what her success might mean on paper. Tonight, with Roland already circling, she felt something colder than doubt move through her. Instinct. A warning without proof. For the first time, she understood that blood could be too close to trust. Rain was falling by the time she pulled out of the garage. The city before dawn looked half-finished, all blurred reflections and long ribbons of light stretched over black pavement. Her wipers moved in a steady rhythm. Nia drove, shoulders tight, mind moving too fast. The wrong text, the board message, the child no one knew about yet, the awful knowledge that every part of her life could be discussed by morning in rooms where she was expected to stay composed. Then came the headlights, too bright, too near. A truck in the next lane swerved hard as if trying to avoid something she never saw. Tires screamed against water. Nia jerked the wheel by instinct. There was the burst of impact, the spit of glass, the crushing sound of metal folding into itself, and then a terrible, impossible pause. Only shock. White light. Then stillness. When consciousness returned, it came with beeping. Air that smelled sterile, weight pressing down on every inch of her body. She tried to open her mouth and could not. Tried to lift a hand and found nothing. Panic rose fast, but inside the panic was something worse. She understood everything. Footsteps crossed the room. Papers shifted. A man's voice said, "Severe trauma, but she's stable for now." Another answered, quieter, "We won't know neurological outcome yet." Nia tried to scream into the darkness of herself. She was here, awake, listening. Then someone near the bed said, "If there's no meaningful response soon, the family and board will need to make decisions." Above her, voices kept speaking as if she were not trapped inside her own life, but already gone. Morning arrived without light. Nia did not see the sunrise. She felt it. The room shifted in small ways first. Footsteps grew more frequent. A door opened and closed with quiet efficiency. Somewhere to her left, a machine changed its rhythm, the steady beeping forming a pattern she began to recognize like a language she had never meant to learn. Air moved softly across her face. Someone adjusted something near her arm. "Vitals stable," a voice said. Nia tried to open her eyes wider, but she could not tell if they were open at all. The world around her existed as sound, pressure, and the strange awareness of her own thoughts echoing inside a body that refused to answer. She focused on her right hand. Move. Just one finger. Nothing happened. The silence inside her body was enormous. Not pain exactly, something worse. A total absence of response. Her mind pushed against it again, harder this time, the way you try to move your leg after it falls asleep. Move. Her thoughts screamed the command. Still nothing. Fabric brushed near her shoulder. A clipboard clicked. Two voices stood close enough that she could hear the soft scrape of a pen across paper. "Head trauma significant but controlled," the first doctor said. His tone was clinical, practiced, the kind of calm that belonged in textbooks. Respiratory function supported. No active bleeding. The second voice sounded younger. And neurologically? A pause. That's where we don't know yet. The words hung in the air like something unfinished. Nia gathered every piece of focus she had and tried again. Blink. Just once. Her mind pictured the movement clearly. Eyelids lowering, lifting. But her body remained locked in the same heavy stillness. The younger doctor spoke again, more cautiously. Could she be in a coma? Possibly. Or a coma-like state. Sometimes patients appear unresponsive even when the brain is processing at some level. But with this kind of trauma, meaningful awareness is unlikely. Unlikely. The word landed like a stone dropped in deep water. Nia felt panic begin to rise, slow and suffocating. She wanted to shout that she could hear them, that every word was landing sharp and clear inside her mind, that she understood the machines, the voices, the quiet rustle of paperwork deciding the future of a woman they thought had vanished. She was here, she was listening, she was remembering everything. The doctors moved closer to the bed. Another complication, the older one added quietly. Lab results indicate early pregnancy. For the first time since waking, something inside Nia felt like it cracked open. Pregnancy. The word moved through her mind like fragile glass. The younger doctor exhaled softly. That will complicate treatment, will need careful monitoring. Stress response, medications, imaging limitations. It's manageable, but the prognosis becomes more layered. They spoke about her child the way architects spoke about structural adjustments. Nia tried again to move her hand. Every thought she had gathered itself around that single command, move, for the baby, for the life that had barely begun. But the silence inside her body did not break. Footsteps approached the doorway, different footsteps this time, slower, confident in a way that didn't belong to nurses or doctors, someone who expected space to be made for them. The door opened. Oh my God, a familiar voice breathed. Marcus. Her brother's voice carried that practiced softness he used in public interviews, the kind meant to sound emotional without ever losing control. She looks, he said, pausing just long enough. She looks so fragile, the doctor answered quietly. Her condition is serious, but she's stable. Marcus stepped closer to the bed. Nia heard the faint creak of leather as he leaned forward. You always were the strong one, Nia, he murmured. To anyone else, it might have sounded like grief. But Nia heard something else in the way he said it. Something calculating. Something already measuring what strength looked like when it no longer belonged to her. And as he exhaled beside the bed, his voice lowered just enough to lose its warmth. We'll take care of everything from here. Marcus stayed beside the bed just long enough for the doctors to leave. When the door clicked shut, the quiet in the room changed. It was no longer the careful quiet of a hospital. It felt heavier, filled with thoughts no one wanted spoken too loudly. Another set of footsteps approached. Nia? A woman's voice whispered softly. Aunt Denise. Nia recognized the gentle tremor Denise used when she wanted to sound deeply concerned. The same tone she used at family gatherings when people were watching. It was the voice of sympathy polished smooth over years of practice. Oh, Marcus, Denise said with a breath that sounded almost like a sigh. This is just devastating. Marcus did not answer right away. Nia felt the mattress shift slightly as someone sat in the chair beside the bed. She always drove herself too hard, Denise continued quietly. You know how she is. Everything perfect, everything controlled. Marcus exhaled through his nose. Yes, he said. That was always Nia. The words sounded respectful, but Nia heard the familiar thread beneath them, the quiet irritation that had followed her success for years. Marcus had never shouted about it, never accused her openly, but it was there in the small comments, the way he laughed when people called her brilliant, the way he reminded others that ambition could make people cold. Denise lowered her voice further. Have you spoken to the board yet? Not officially, Marcus said. But Roland reached out. Of course he had. Even trapped inside her silent body, Nia felt a cold understanding settle into place. Denise leaned closer. They must be worried about stability, she said carefully. The company is tied so closely to her leadership. Investors get nervous when uncertainty appears. Marcus let out a quiet breath. That's exactly the word Roland used. Uncertainty. Nia tried again to move her hand. Nothing. Her mind pushed harder, panic pressing against the invisible wall around her body. She wanted to interrupt them, to tell them she could hear every word forming in the space above her bed. But the silence inside her remained complete. Marcus continued, his voice taking on a thoughtful tone. For now, the board will likely push for temporary authority, just until her condition becomes clearer. Temporary, Denise repeated. Yes. A pause followed. Then Denise said, almost delicately, well, you are family. Marcus did not answer immediately. Nia knew that pause. She had heard it all her life. It was the pause Marcus used when an idea arrived that benefited him. Someone needs to represent stability, he said finally. The company can't drift. The board needs reassurance. The media will start asking questions soon. Denise hummed softly in agreement. And the headlines, she added, those can get ugly very quickly. Marcus shifted in the chair. I'll frame it as support, he said. Family stepping in during a difficult time. Nia's mind screamed. Support? But Denise had not finished. There's something else, she said quietly. Marcus turned toward her. What? Denise hesitated. The doctors mentioned something about pregnancy. The word moved through the room like a fragile object being passed between careful hands. Marcus did not react immediately. Then he said slowly, that complicates things. Yes, Denise murmured. It could destabilize the narrative. You know how the press is with personal matters. Especially when someone has built such a controlled image, Nia felt fear rise in a new way. They were not speaking about her childlike family. They were speaking about risk. Do we know who the father is? Marcus asked. No, Denise said. And if she stays like this, we may never know. Silence followed. Nia felt trapped inside it. Trapped while the story of her life was quietly rewritten over her body. Marcus leaned back in the chair again. If she recovers, he said slowly, we deal with things differently. And if she doesn't? Denise asked. Marcus's answer came without hesitation. Then, we protect the brand. He stood, smoothing his jacket. Nia heard the faint scrape of the chair as he stepped closer to the bed again. For a moment, his voice softened into something that might have sounded loving to anyone else. If she stays like this, Marcus said quietly, decisions will have to be made quickly. The news reached Elijah before the morning buses finished filling the streets. He had just stepped out of the employee entrance of Bell Horizon Tower, the sky still pale with early light, when two security guards near the lobby doors began speaking in low, shocked voices. Did you see the alert? I just got it. CEO's in the hospital. Car accident before sunrise. Elijah slowed without meaning to. The guards continued talking, their words moving quickly now that the story had begun spreading. Bad one too, from what I heard. They say she's alive, but nobody knows much else yet. Elijah felt something tighten in his chest. He reached into his pocket and pulled out his phone. The message thread was still there. I'm pregnant. And beneath it, his reply from the quiet executive floor hours earlier. You do not have to carry news like that alone. For a moment, he simply stared at the screen. Then, understanding settled over him slowly, like a door closing in a quiet room. The woman who had sent that message was not just some frightened stranger. It had been Nia Bell, the same woman now lying somewhere in a hospital bed, while the entire building whispered about her fate. Elijah rubbed a tired hand across his face. People were already gathering near the lobby television, where financial news rolled across a ticker. The story had begun appearing on screens, footage of the tower, careful words about an overnight accident, speculation about the company's leadership. He turned away from the noise and stepped toward the bus stop. During the ride home, the city passed by in grey morning pieces, but Elijah barely noticed it. His mind stayed on the message. Why had she sent it? Had she meant to reach someone she trusted? A friend? A doctor? Maybe family? Someone who would know what to say when a life changed in an instant. Instead, it had landed on the phone of a janitor finishing a night shift. He thought about ignoring it. It would be easier that way. A man in his position did not walk into the private life of a billionaire executive. Even the smallest gesture could be misunderstood. People liked tidy stories, and kindness often looked suspicious when it crossed lines of status. But the message did not feel finished to him. It felt like a hand reaching through the dark, and Elijah had already answered. By the time he reached the small apartment he shared with Zuri, the decision had settled quietly in his chest. He would not cause trouble. He would not demand to see her. But he would keep the promise he had made without realizing it. Later that afternoon, after Zuri left for school and the building quieted again, Elijah took a bus across the city to the hospital listed in the news reports. The lobby smelt faintly of disinfectant and coffee. People moved through the space with the tired rhythm hospitals always carried. Families waiting, nurses passing quickly. Voices kept low. At the front desk, he simply asked, "Is Miss Nia Bell here?" The receptionist nodded carefully. "She is. But only family visits right now." "I understand," Elijah said gently. He had expected that answer. He stepped aside, pulling a small folded piece of paper from his jacket pocket. He had written the note slowly on the bus ride over, his handwriting careful in the quiet shaking of the vehicle. After a moment, he approached the nurse's station nearby. "Excuse me," he said. A nurse looked up. "Yes?" "I don't need to see her," Elijah explained. "But could you place this near her bed?" "It's just a message." The nurse hesitated, glancing at the name written on the outside. Then she nodded. "I can do that." Elijah thanked her, and left before he could change his mind. Upstairs, the nurse stepped quietly into Nia's room. Machines hummed softly around the bed. For a moment she looked at the folded note, then opened it and read the words written inside. "You texted the wrong person," she said gently, her voice floating into the quiet room. "But maybe not the wrong heart." She paused. "You are not alone." Inside the stillness of her unmoving body, Nia heard the words, and for the first time since the crash, something inside her felt true. The boardroom on the 42nd floor had been designed to feel calm. Soft lighting, a long table of dark wood, polished until it reflected the ceiling like water, walls of glass that overlooked the entire city, the kind of room where voices rarely needed to rise because everyone inside understood the value of control. That morning, one chair remained empty. At the head of the table sat the space where Nia Bell had always been. No one moved it. But no one waited for her either. Roland Pike folded his hands neatly in front of him as the meeting began. His silver hair and steady posture gave him the look of a man who had survived decades in finance by never showing urgency. Around him, the other board members sat with tablets open, papers aligned, expressions carefully neutral. "This is an unfortunate situation," Roland began. His voice was smooth, measured. "We all wish Miss Bell a full recovery." A few heads nodded, quiet agreement, proper sympathy. Then another board member cleared her throat. "The markets opened with speculation this morning," she said. "Nothing dramatic yet, but the analysts are asking questions." Roland inclined his head slightly. That was expected. Across the table, Marcus Bell sat with his hands clasped together as if holding himself steady. He had arrived wearing a dark suit and the expression of a man carrying fresh grief. "I appreciate everyone gathering so quickly," Marcus said softly. "My sister dedicated her life to this company. She would want stability." The word hung in the air. Stability. Everyone in the room understood what it meant. Another board member spoke up. "The issue isn't the accident itself," he said carefully. "It's uncertainty. Investors need clarity about leadership." "Exactly," Roland replied. "We cannot allow speculation to define the narrative." He tapped one finger lightly against the table. "Interim authority may be necessary." The woman beside him looked toward the empty chair. "Do we know anything about her neurological condition yet?" Marcus lowered his eyes. "The doctors are still evaluating," he said, "but recovery from injuries like this can take time." The sentence was crafted with precision, enough truth to sound honest, enough uncertainty to create space. Roland leaned back slightly. "Then the responsible course is to prepare for all possibilities." Another voice joined the conversation. Temporary leadership structure? Yes, Roland said calmly, publicly framed as precaution. Internally structured to maintain operational continuity, a few members began typing notes. Markets respond poorly to leadership vacuums, one of them added. Marcus spoke again, his tone careful. As family, I would naturally want to support the company during this time. Roland turned his head toward him. And your sister's legacy, he said gently. Marcus nodded, accepting the phrase. I've worked closely with Nia on several initiatives. I understand her vision. If the board needs someone to bridge this period, I'm willing. The offer landed exactly as intended, not a demand, a sacrifice. Roland let a thoughtful pause settle across the room before speaking again. Continuity matters, he said. But so does long-term planning. His gaze drifted briefly toward the empty chair. If Miss Bell's condition proves temporary, adjustments can be made. And if it doesn't? Another member asked quietly. Roland's expression did not change. Then the board must act with clarity. A screen at the end of the table displayed the company's stock chart, small fluctuations moving across the line like restless waves. Permanent leadership transitions are never easy, Roland continued, but institutions must survive beyond individuals. Marcus lowered his eyes again, the image of mourning. We all want what's best for the company, he murmured. The room fell quiet. Finally, Roland spoke the words that settled everything into place. Our responsibility, he said, is fiduciary duty. The phrase sounded clean, professional, like a pair of white gloves worn while handling something delicate. Hours later, far across the city, a nurse left a tablet playing softly on the small table beside Nia's hospital bed. Financial news filled the room. A reporter summarized the emergency board meeting with polite restraint. Discussions of interim leadership while CEO Nia Bell recovers from injuries sustained in an early morning accident. The recording replayed a short clip of Roland Pike speaking to reporters outside the tower. His voice was calm, measured. Our focus remains the long-term health of the company, he said. The board will act in accordance with its fiduciary duty. Inside her silent body, Nia listened, and understood exactly how quickly mercy had been replaced by strategy. Nurse Camille Harper did not believe in rushing past what she could not explain. Hospitals were full of noise, machines beeping, carts rolling across tile floors, phones ringing at nurses' stations, doctors giving quick instructions as they moved between rooms. Most days the pace was so steady that people learned to make decisions quickly, trusting patterns they had seen 100 times before. But Camille had never been comfortable ignoring the one time something did not fit. She had worked long enough to recognize the quiet spaces between ordinary symptoms and something else entirely. Sometimes it was a change in breathing. Sometimes it was a patient squeezing a hand when the chart said they could not, and sometimes it was something even smaller. The first time Camille noticed it, she almost dismissed it. She stood beside Nia Bell's bed, checking the morning monitors, when Marcus entered the room again. His voice carried that same soft concern he had used the day before. How is she today? He asked. Camille glanced at the screen. The numbers shifted slightly, nothing dramatic, just a brief rise in Nia's pulse before settling again. Stress response, Camille thought automatically. That was normal. But later, when a different visitor stepped quietly into the room, a hospital administrator reviewing paperwork, the monitors stayed calm. No change at all. Camille noticed it, not because it was dramatic, but because it was different. She began paying closer attention after that. Over the next day, small patterns began forming. They were subtle enough that no one else commented on them. A quick change in heart rate when Marcus spoke too long beside the bed. A faint stabilization when the room fell quiet again. Once, a tiny rise in blood pressure when a doctor mentioned the word pregnancy. Camille wrote nothing official in the chart, but she began keeping a small notebook in her pocket. Just observations. Nothing more. Nia Bell had been labelled non-responsive, but Camille had seen enough patients over the years to know the difference between silence and absence. Some bodies simply took longer to answer. What bothered her more was the speed of the decisions happening around the bed. Administrative calls came often now. Visitors from the hospital board had appeared briefly that afternoon, questions about long-term care facilities, questions about consent authority, questions about timelines. Timelines. Camille heard the word too many times for someone who had been unconscious less than 2 days. Late that evening, Marcus arrived again with 2 hospital administrators. Camille stood near the monitors while they spoke quietly by the window. If her condition remains unchanged, Marcus was saying, the family should have broad authority to make necessary decisions. One administrator nodded. Of course, but protocol still requires medical review. And that review takes time, Marcus said gently. Time the company may not have. Camille kept her expression neutral, but something inside her tightened. Patients were not business contracts. They did not expire on a schedule. When the men finished speaking and left the room, the silence returned again. Camille stepped closer to the bed. Nia's face looked peaceful at first glance, but Camille had seen enough still patients to recognize tension hiding beneath the surface. The faint tightness around the mouth, the subtle strain across the brow, not absence, something else. Camille reached toward the small table beside the bed, where a folded note rested. She had placed it there earlier, after the man from the lobby dropped it off. She unfolded the paper again. The handwriting was careful and steady. For a moment she hesitated. Then she read the words quietly into the room. You texted the wrong person, she said softly. But maybe not the wrong heart. Her eyes moved to the final line. You are not alone. For a second, nothing happened. Then the monitor beside the bed gave a small, unmistakable shift. Nia's heart rate rose. The hospital lobby always felt larger in the late afternoon. Sunlight filtered through the tall windows, stretching across the polished floor in long golden shapes. People moved through the space in quiet lines, nurses ending shifts, visitors holding paper cups of coffee, families waiting beside elevators with tired hope in their faces. Elijah Reed stepped through the front doors with Zuri's small hand tucked into his. She had just finished school, her backpack bouncing lightly against her shoulders as she walked. Elijah hated bringing her along on errands like this, but childcare cost more than he could manage most weeks. So they moved through the city together often, bus rides, grocery stops, quiet waiting rooms. Zuri didn't seem to mind. Children had a way of treating ordinary inconveniences like small adventures. Is this the place? She asked softly as they stepped toward a row of chairs near the window. Yes, Elijah said. He helped her slide out of her backpack before sitting down beside her. The television across the lobby played muted news while people passed by in careful silence. Zuri pulled out her small drawing pad and a handful of crayons from the front pocket of her bag. What are you drawing today? Elijah asked. She thought about it for a moment, then shrugged. Something nice. Her crayons moved slowly across the page. Green first, then blue, then the soft yellow she always saved for sunlight. Elijah watched her quietly. Children drew the world the way they wished it could be. After a minute, she looked up. Daddy? Yeah? The lady we came to see. Is she very sick? Elijah nodded gently. Yes. Zuri frowned a little as she coloured. Does she have someone with her? Doctors and nurses, Elijah said. That's good, Zuri replied. Then she paused again, thinking. But does she have someone who just sits with her? The question caught Elijah off guard. He leaned back in the chair and rubbed a hand over his beard. I don't think so, he admitted. Zuri looked back down at the drawing. Then someone should. A few minutes later, Elijah walked over to the nurse's station again. Camille looked up as he approached, recognizing him from the note he had left earlier. I'm sorry to bother you again, Elijah said quietly. I was just passing through with my daughter. I thought maybe we could leave another message or something. Camille glanced down at the little girl standing beside him, clutching a drawing pad. How old are you? Camille asked her gently. 7, Zuri answered. And what's that you're holding? My picture. Camille crouched slightly to see it. On the paper was a simple drawing, a woman lying in a hospital bed. Beside the bed was a wide patch of green filled with bright flowers and a crooked sun shining overhead. A garden? Camille asked. Zuri nodded proudly. So the lady can see something nice. Camille hesitated for a moment. Hospital rules were clear. Family only. but sometimes rules had small spaces inside them where kindness could live. She straightened slowly. "You can come up," she said, "just for a minute." Elijah blinked in surprise. "Are you sure?" "1 minute," Camille repeated with a small smile. The room upstairs was quiet when they entered. Machines hummed softly beside the bed. The evening light through the window made the space feel softer than it had during the day. Zuri stepped forward first. She looked at Nia for a long moment, studying the still figure on the bed with the open honesty only children carried. Then she spoke in a gentle voice. "Hi." Elijah stood near the door, unsure what to say, but Zuri had already decided. "My daddy says people can still hear love," she told Nia matter-of-factly. She carefully placed the drawing on the table beside the bed. "So I made you a garden." The paper rested beside the folded note Elijah had left earlier. 2 small pieces of kindness and a quiet hospital room. And though Nia could not move, she saw the garden clearly in her mind. Memory returned to Nia, the way sunlight sometimes slips through a closed curtain, thin at first, then slowly widening. Inside the still prison of her body, time had lost its shape. Hours blurred into each other. Machines hummed, footsteps came and went, voices passed above her like distant weather. Yet beneath all of that silence, her mind kept moving. And with nowhere else to go, it moved backward. Before the tower, before the boardroom, before the empty chair with her name on it, there had been a girl sitting at a library table long after midnight, surrounded by textbooks and half-finished coffee. Nia remembered that girl clearly. She had grown up in a neighborhood where ambition was treated like a fragile thing. Teachers encouraged it carefully, as if too much hope might disappoint everyone involved. Money was tight, expectations tighter. But Nia had always felt something inside her that refused to stay small. Scholarships had been the first door. She earned them one after another, not because anyone told her she was special, but because she understood early that effort could build its own kind of protection. While other students rested, Nia stayed in quiet rooms under fluorescent lights, teaching herself how to outwork doubt. She learned numbers first, then systems, then the quiet language of opportunity hidden inside problems other people avoided. By the time she finished school, exhaustion felt normal. So did discipline. She stepped into the business world already carrying the habits that would one day build Bell Horizon from nothing more than a plan written in the margins of a notebook. Those early years blurred together now in her memory. Cheap offices, second-hand furniture, nights sleeping on a couch because rent had been spent on software licenses instead. There were meetings where investors barely looked at her, meetings where they assumed the real founder must be arriving later, meetings where polite smiles carried questions no one bothered to hide. A young black woman leading a tech infrastructure company was not the picture most of them expected, so Nia learned something important. If the room would not believe her voice, she would sharpen it until disbelief became impossible. She spoke clearly, precisely, never wasting a sentence, every number memorized, every projection backed by proof. Over time, the hesitation faded. Success had its own gravity. Bell Horizon grew. 1 contract became 5, 5 became 20. Offices expanded. Employees filled floors that once echoed with empty space. Investors who once doubted her now asked how they could join. Wealth followed quietly behind the momentum. But wealth did not change the rhythm of her life. Nia's calendar remained full, her phone rarely silent. Every decision carried consequences for hundreds of employees and millions of dollars moving through the systems her company built. Respect came. So did fear. People began straightening when she entered rooms. Conversations stopped mid-sentence when she passed through hallways. Even compliments carried a careful distance, as if admiration needed armor. Nia became untouchable, not because she wanted to be, because the world often mistook strength for isolation. There were nights when the tower lights burned long after everyone else had gone home. Nia would stand beside the glass wall of her office, looking out at the city, wondering when ambition had quietly replaced the idea of belonging. Her life had become strategy, success, survival. She had everything she had worked for. But sometimes it felt like she had built a kingdom no one lived in with her. Then came the morning in her apartment bathroom. The small white test sat on the edge of the sink, silent and ordinary. Nia had stared at it for a long time before picking it up. 2 lines. Clear. Certain. For a moment she simply sat there. No boardroom voice. No press strategy. No calculations. Just the quiet realization that something unexpected had entered her carefully structured life. Not scandal. Not fear. Wonder. She remembered resting her hand against her stomach, still unsure how to hold the news. And for the first time in years, she had sat in complete silence. Not because she was ashamed. Because something inside her had opened that strategy could never plan. The truth about the child was quieter than most people would ever imagine. There was no secret affair, no dramatic love triangle hiding behind it. No scandal waiting to explode across headlines. The father had been a good man. His name was Daniel Mercer. Daniel had not belonged to the world of boardrooms and quarterly reports. He had been a systems engineer who consulted briefly with Bell Horizon during its early expansion years. Careful, thoughtful, the kind of man who listened more than he spoke. Their connection had begun simply, long conversations over project diagrams, shared late-night work sessions, the slow understanding that both of them preferred honesty over performance. For a time, Nia had allowed herself to step outside the rigid structure of her life. Daniel never treated her like a symbol of success. He did not seem impressed by the title of CEO or the attention that followed it. When he looked at her, he saw the woman who had built something difficult with her own hands. That kind of recognition had felt rare. Their relationship had never been loud. No public displays, no photographs for magazines, no speculation for gossip columns. It had been quiet and real in a way Nia had almost forgotten was possible. Then, months earlier, Daniel collapsed during a morning run. A sudden medical emergency. An aneurysm the doctors said no one could have predicted. By the time Nia reached the hospital that day, the machines were already silent. She had buried the grief privately, the way she handled most of her personal life, neatly, without drawing attention. Work filled the space that loss left behind. Meetings, travel, negotiations. Motion kept her from sitting too long with what had disappeared. The pregnancy came later, a small, unexpected continuation of something she had thought ended. When the test confirmed it, Nia felt something fragile return to her world. Not just the memory of Daniel, but the possibility of a life that belonged to her outside of strategy and survival. Still, she told no one, not at first. Part of that decision was practical. Early pregnancy carried risks, and Nia had learnt long ago that the world rarely showed patience for uncertainty. But another part of the silence was more complicated. She knew the board well enough to predict their reaction. Maternity would not be seen as something human. It would be studied like a weakness in leadership structure. Investors would wonder about time away from work, succession planning, control. Her family would see something else entirely. Inheritance. And the media, always hungry for personal details about powerful women, would turn tenderness into spectacle within hours. Nia wanted one small space where the news belonged only to her. She had planned to wait, to confirm everything medically, to think through the legal protections the child would need before the world began asking questions. But the night before, the accident had shaken her more than she expected. The doctor's call had come late, confirming the pregnancy again through lab work. A calm voice explaining early care, precautions, follow-up appointments. Only minutes later, Roland Pike's message arrived. Succession risks. The words had felt cold and deliberate, as if the future of her life had already been converted into a spreadsheet. Fear crept in quietly then, not panic. Just the sudden realization that the life growing inside her would exist in a world already measuring it. So she reached for her phone. She had meant to text her counselor, a woman she trusted to speak plainly when everything else in Nia's life required performance. Someone who knew how heavy leadership could become when no one expected you to be afraid. But the night had been long. Her eyes tired, her thoughts scattered between grief, hope, and exhaustion. The message thread she opened looked familiar enough, and she typed 2 simple words, "I'm pregnant," then pressed send before she could reconsider. Only afterward did she realize the mistake. The number was not her counselor. It belonged to someone else entirely. A stranger. Yet when the reply came back, It did not sound like curiosity or confusion. It sounded like kindness. And now, lying silent inside a hospital bed, Nia understood something strange about that moment. The message had reached the wrong person. But he might have been the only one who answered with a clean heart. Elijah Reed had learnt about dignity in a quiet room that smelled faintly of lavender and medicine. It had been a hospice room. Mariah's room. Long before the accident that placed Nia Bell in a hospital bed across the city, Elijah had spent his evenings in that small space beside the woman he loved. The windows were narrow, the light soft and careful, as if the building itself understood that the people inside needed gentleness more than brightness. Hospice had a different rhythm from the rest of the hospital. There were no hurried footsteps, no urgent voices. Time slowed down in those rooms, stretching around moments that mattered in ways ordinary days rarely allowed. Elijah remembered sitting beside Mariah's bed with a bottle of lotion in his hands. Her illness had taken strength from her body piece by piece. Her skin had grown dry from the medications, so each night he rubbed lotion slowly into her hands the way the nurse had shown him. Small circles. Gentle pressure, nothing rushed. Mariah always watched him with that quiet smile she carried even on the hardest days. "You're very serious about this," she had teased once, her voice thin but warm. Elijah shrugged, pretending to inspect his work. "Well," he said, "if I'm going to do it, I might as well do it right." Across the room, little Zuri would sit on the floor with her crayons, drawing pictures she proudly explained to anyone who asked. Flowers, houses, bright suns that always looked slightly crooked. Sometimes Mariah asked Elijah to turn on music. Old songs played softly from Elijah's phone, slow gospel melodies, familiar voices from years before they met. Mariah would close her eyes while the music drifted through the room like a prayer that didn't need words. Hospice nurses moved through those evenings like quiet guardians. They adjusted blankets, checked medications, spoke in voices that never startled the air. One night, long after Zuri had fallen asleep in the chair beside the window, Mariah reached for Elijah's hand. Her fingers were light now, almost weightless. "Elijah," she said. He leaned closer. "Yeah, baby." She studied his face for a moment, as if memorizing it. "Promise me something." His chest tightened immediately. "Anything." Mariah shook her head softly. "Not anything," she said with a small smile. "Just something important." Elijah waited. "Don't let pain make you hard." The sentence surprised him. "I won't," he said quickly. But Mariah held his hand tighter. "I mean it," she whispered. "When people hurt you, when life changes, promise me you won't start treating the world like it owes you something." Elijah swallowed. "You're the kind of man who notices people others forget," she continued gently. "The quiet ones. The ones who feel invisible." A tear slipped from the corner of Elijah's eye before he could stop it. "That's a good thing," Mariah said. "Don't lose it." He nodded slowly. "I promise." Mariah rested back against the pillow then, satisfied. "Good," she murmured. That promise stayed with him long after the hospice room fell silent. It followed him through bus rides before dawn, through night shifts in quiet buildings, through the small routines of raising Zuri alone. It reminded him that kindness was not weakness. It was a decision. That evening in Nia Bell's hospital room, Elijah stood beside the table, changing the flowers Zuri had brought earlier that week. The old ones had begun to wilt, their petals soft and tired. He replaced them carefully with fresh ones from the hospital lobby shop. Nia lay still in the bed beside him. Machines hummed quietly. Elijah spoke the way he always did now, plainly, as if the woman listening inside the silence deserved ordinary conversation instead of careful sympathy. "My wife used to like flowers like these," he said. He adjusted the vase. "Mariah." The name settled gently in the air. "She taught me something before she passed," Elijah continued. "Said dignity matters most when the world starts treating people like they're finished." He glanced toward Nia. "Seems like the world does that a lot." The room stayed quiet. Elijah rested his hands on the back of the chair for a moment. "I don't know what tomorrow holds," he said finally. Then his voice softened just a little. "But I know this much." He looked toward the still woman in the bed. "You are not alone." The language of power rarely sounded cruel. It sounded careful. In Nia Bell's hospital room, the conversations about her future began appearing in quiet phrases, clinical, reasonable, almost gentle to the ear. Continuity of care, specialized recovery environment, long-term neurological support. Each phrase floated through the room like a piece of polished glass. Clean, professional, difficult to argue with if you only listened to the surface. But Nurse Camille Harper had learnt long ago that the surface of words was not always where their meaning lived. The first hint came during a morning meeting outside Nia's door. Marcus Bell stood beside Roland Pike in the hallway, speaking with a hospital administrator. Their voices stayed low, but hospitals carried sound in strange ways, and Camille heard enough as she reviewed charts nearby. "We've identified an excellent facility," Marcus was saying, "private neurological rehabilitation. Very discreet." Roland nodded slowly. "World-class care," he added. "Exactly the environment someone in Miss Bell's condition deserves." The administrator glanced down at the paperwork Roland handed over. "It's not local," she said. "No," Marcus replied gently, "but that's precisely the point." Camille's pen paused over the chart she was holding. The administrator continued reading. "This facility is 3 states away." "Yes," Roland said smoothly. "They specialize in complex neurological recovery. Far fewer distractions than a major city hospital." Distractions. The word settled in Camille's mind. Visitors. Oversight. Questions. Marcus leaned forward slightly. "My sister would want the best care possible," he said. "And frankly, the attention she's receiving here is becoming complicated." "Complicated how?" the administrator asked. "The media," Roland answered quickly. "The company. Bell Horizon employs thousands of people. Stability matters right now." Camille watched the administrator flip through the pages. "This transfer request requires expedited approval," she said. "That's unusual." Marcus gave a soft, tired smile. "Unusual circumstances." Roland added calmly, "We're simply trying to act responsibly before speculation spreads further." The conversation ended soon after, but the paperwork remained on the desk long enough for Camille to see it when the administrator stepped away. She did not snoop. She simply noticed. The dates did not line up cleanly. Some forms had been prepared before the neurological evaluation even finished. Others required signatures from departments that had not yet completed their assessments. Urgency ran through the pages like an underlined sentence. Camille closed the file quietly and stepped back. Something about the situation was moving too quickly. Inside the hospital room, Nia listened to every piece of it. The door opened again later that afternoon. Marcus entered with a doctor she did not recognize, their conversation already underway. "The facility has experience with cases like this," the doctor said. "Long-term monitoring, specialized neurological equipment." Marcus nodded. "That's reassuring." The doctor flipped through the chart. "She's stable enough for transfer, within days if necessary." Days. The word struck Nia like a bell inside her silent mind. Marcus moved closer to the bed. "Of course we'll continue evaluating," he said smoothly, "but distance from the city may help protect her privacy." Privacy. The word felt like a curtain being pulled closed. If she left this hospital, everything familiar would disappear. Camille's careful presence, Elijah's quiet visits, even the simple chance that someone might notice she was still here inside the silence. Far away, the board could do anything they wanted. Her mind pushed against the stillness of her body again. Move. Just one finger. Nothing answered. Later that evening, Camille returned with a new chart sheet. She clipped it carefully to the board at the foot of the bed. Among the notes and observations, a new line had been added in neat hospital lettering. Transfer scheduled, Friday, 8 a.m., 3 days away. The words sat on the page like a verdict already announced in public, and inside the quiet prison of her body, Nia felt the first true wave of panic rise. Because distance would not just move her body, it would erase her. By the time Elijah arrived each evening, the hospital had already begun to quiet down. Daytime voices faded into softer sounds. The busy rhythm of carts and phones slowed into something steadier, like the building itself was breathing out after a long shift. The hallway lights dimmed slightly, and the air carried that familiar mix of disinfectant and warm coffee from the night staff's break room. Elijah always stopped at the front desk first. Just a few minutes, he would say politely. Sometimes the nurse on duty nodded without question. Sometimes Camille happened to be there, and she would simply glance toward the hallway and say, "Room 12." He never stayed long, but he came every night he could. This evening, he stepped into the room with the careful quiet of someone who understood that hospitals belong to people in pain. The flowers Zuri had drawn earlier still rested beside the bed, along with a little stack of pictures she kept adding to it. Nia lay exactly as she had the night before. Still. Silent. But Elijah did not speak to her like someone who had disappeared. He pulled the chair closer and sat down beside the bed. "You know," he said gently, "Zuri packed my lunch this morning." The sentence floated into the quiet room like something ordinary and human. "She decided peanut butter sandwiches taste better when they're cut into triangles," he continued. "I told her that's the same sandwich either way, but she says shape matters." He chuckled softly. Kids believe in details. Nia listened. She could not move, could not blink, could not even turn her head toward the sound of his voice. But his words reached her clearly. Elijah rested his hands loosely on his knees. "The bus driver on Route 8 still hums that same old song every morning," he went on. "Don't know the name of it, but he's been humming it for 3 years now. Zuri says it's his theme music." He paused, looking out the small window beside the bed where evening clouds had begun turning pink. "City looks different from up here," he added quietly. Slower somehow, he never spoke about the accident, never spoke about her condition. He spoke the way people did when they believed someone was still part of the world. The door opened a little while later. Zuri stepped in with Camille beside her, carrying her drawing pad like a treasure chest. "I made another one," she announced proudly. Elijah smiled. "Let's see it." Zuri climbed onto the chair and held up the page. The picture showed a hospital room, a bed, a small stick figure person lying still beneath a blanket. But in the corner of the drawing, bright green grass stretched beneath a wide yellow sun. "A garden again?" Elijah asked. Zuri nodded seriously. "When people are sad," she explained, "I draw gardens so they remember outside." She walked over to the bedside table and carefully added the drawing to the small stack already there. Each one carried a piece of green somewhere: grass, leaves, flowers, sometimes just a small patch of colour in the corner of the page, proof that the outside world still existed. Inside her silent body, Nia held on to that image. She could not cry, could not smile. But the idea of sunlight and gardens and a child who believed in small kindnesses wrapped around her thoughts like something alive. It reminded her she was still here, still part of the world beyond this room. Across the room, Camille watched the monitor beside the bed. She had begun paying attention to its small changes during Elijah's visits. Tonight the pattern appeared again. Nia's pulse slowed, not dramatically, just enough to settle into a steady rhythm that looked almost peaceful. Camille folded her arms quietly. She had tried telling herself the signs meant nothing, that she was imagining intention inside random fluctuations. But the patterns kept returning. Every time Elijah spoke, every time the child entered the room, every time the words "you are not alone" filled the quiet air. Camille looked from the monitor to the woman lying motionless on the bed, and for the first time since the transfer paperwork appeared, she understood something clearly. Remaining neutral was no longer the safe choice. Marcus did not come alone that afternoon. The door opened slowly, and Aunt Denise stepped into the room first, carrying the soft scent of expensive perfume that always seemed slightly out of place in hospital air. She moved with the careful composure of someone accustomed to quiet, important spaces. Marcus followed behind her, holding a slim folder under his arm. For a moment they both stood beside the bed without speaking, looking down at Nia the way people sometimes looked at photographs of someone who had already passed. Denise sighed gently. "Such a terrible thing," she murmured. Her voice carried sympathy the way a well-practiced actor carried emotion, smooth, controlled, and carefully timed. Marcus nodded. "Yes." Denise stepped closer to the bed and adjusted the blanket slightly, though it did not need adjusting. "She worked herself too hard," Denise said, "always chasing the next expansion, the next deal. I told her once that life requires balance." Marcus gave a faint smile that did not reach his eyes. She wouldn't have listened. Denise turned toward the chair near the window and sat down gracefully. Marcus remained standing. "I've been reviewing the estate documents," Denise continued after a moment. "Her trust structure is extensive." Marcus opened the folder in his hands. "It had to be," he said. "Bell Horizon is tied closely to her personal assets." Denise nodded thoughtfully. "The exposure is significant, especially with no formal succession structure in place." Marcus flipped through the pages. "We'll stabilize that." Denise leaned forward slightly, lowering her voice, even though the room held no one else who could hear. "There is also the issue of the pregnancy." Marcus's eyes flicked briefly toward the bed. "Yes. The child introduces complications," Denise continued calmly. "Inheritance rights, trust allocations, potential legal disputes if paternity becomes public." The words moved through the room with the slow precision of accountants reviewing numbers. Inside her silent body, Nia felt something cold spread through her chest. They were not speaking about a child. They were speaking about a variable. Marcus closed the folder halfway. "I've already considered that," he said. "A quiet medical review would clarify the situation." Denise tilted her head. "What kind of review?" "Confirmation of gestational timeline, viability assessments," Marcus replied. "Standard medical information. Discreetly handled, discreetly." The word landed like a quiet threat. Denise rested her hands together in her lap. "If the pregnancy complicates matters," she said slowly, "it may be wise to resolve it early." Nia's thoughts flared with sudden terror. Resolve it. The phrase held no warmth, no humanity, just strategy. For the first time since waking inside the prison of her own body, Nia understood something clearly. Her family was not waiting for her to return. They were planning a future that did not include her voice, or her child. Marcus walked closer to the bed again, glancing down at her still face. "The board already sees this as a vulnerability," he said. "A hidden heir appearing during a leadership crisis could destabilize everything." Denise nodded. "Yes. The optics alone would be difficult." Marcus's voice lowered further. "We'll need to clean up loose ends before the transfer." In the hallway outside the door, Camille paused mid-step. She had been walking past with a medication tray when the words reached her through the small gap where the door had not fully closed. "Clean up loose ends." The phrase made her stop completely. She did not interrupt the conversation. Instead, she stepped quietly back toward the nurse's station and opened the small notebook she had begun keeping. Carefully, she wrote down the words she had heard. Date. Time. Names. She closed the notebook slowly, her jaw tightening just slightly. Inside the room, Marcus and Denise finished their conversation and left a few minutes later. The door clicked shut behind them. Silence returned. Inside that silence, Nia gathered every piece of strength her mind could still reach. They saw her as finished. They saw her child as leverage.